Here we go. We're going to be now learning the derivative rules of sine and cosine. What? You're going to want to memorize these. Study them maybe like 30 seconds a night or less just to get them down. I have students that go months and they're like, man, I keep forgetting those trig derivatives. Don't be one of those students. That's sad. So here are the rules. The derivative of sine of x, what is it? Well, it's cosine of x. Meaning the slopes of sine of x are described by cosine of x. And I'll show you why that makes sense from the graph below in a second. What's the derivative of cosine x? Well, you might think it's sine. It's close. It's the opposite of sine of x. So what that means is if we want the slope of cosine of x at any x value, we plug that x value in here and we get our slope of cosine. That's it. Know those two rules. There's 4 other trig functions we'll get to down the road, but for now just learn sine and cosine. So why is it that the derivative of sine is cosine? Well, let's take a look at this. Our cosine graph is right here. Right? So our cosine graph, I guess that's, I'm colorblind, something you might not know about me, but I'm going to say that's orange. It could be green. I don't know. I believe it's orange. And this other color here could be blue, purple. I have no idea. It could be pink. Anyway, looking at these two graphs, I know that this is sine right here. And I'll just draw that that right there is sine of x. And this right here is cosine x. Notice that the slopes of sine, so like let's look at one point here. The slope of sine here is 0. The y value of cosine is 0. All the slopes of sine on this entire interval are negative, right? This curve's going down. And all the y values of cosine are negative that entire time. In fact, the slopes get more and more negative until pi. Pi is the steepest, most negative that we get to. And then the slopes get less negative on sine. And if you take a look at this, the y values get more and more negative until we get to pi. And they're still negative, but then they get less negative here. So again, the derivative of sine is cosine because the y values on cosine correspond with the slope values on sine. The same reasoning happens between cosine and the opposite of sine. So now let's take a look at cosine. So cosine has a slope of 0 here, and sine has a y value of 0 there. Cosine has negative slopes here, all down here. What does sine have? Positive y values. And when cosine has positive slopes, y has negative y values. So the y values on sine are the opposite of the slope values in cosine. And that's why the derivative of cosine is negative sine. That's beautiful. Now, we could show it with the difference quotient, right? The formal limit definition of the derivative. And that's also how you can get these values, but I'm going to spare you that for now. Okay, pretty cool. So let's just go ahead and practice with this. It says find the derivative of each function. Don't mind if I do. So what happens when we have a coefficient? Nothing. It hangs out. So you've got 6 times, what's the derivative of sine? You got it memorized. Cosine of x. Minus 5. Again, that coefficient's chilling. Then what's the derivative of cosine? The derivative of cosine is minus sine of x. Oh, that's beautiful. And we've got to simplify it now. So we've got 6 cosine of x. Minus 5 times minus sine of x is plus 5 sine x. And that's it. F of x. Well, now, let's jump into there. We're going to take a derivative. F prime of x. Well, you've got minus 2's just hanging out. Now, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I noticed that this is a little bit wonky. So I'm going to, before we take the derivative, I'm going to just rewrite this so that we're ready to rock and roll with the derivative, just like we did the rewrites in a previous video. So negative 2 sine x plus, that's the same as 1/4 cosine x, minus 1/9 x cubed. Oh my goodness, what do we do? We've got a polynomial and trig. How do we deal with it? Go one term at a time, y'all. You got this. F prime of x is equal to, negative 2 is a coefficient, it's hanging out. What's the derivative of sine? Cosine of x. Plus, well, not so fast. Well, I guess I'll keep it as plus 1/4 times. What's the derivative of cosine? Negative sine. Or negative sine, if you're thinking higher pitch there. Minus 1/9 times. What's the derivative of x cubed? Power rule. 3 times x to the 3 minus 1 is 3x squared. And now we just clean this thing up. Negative 2 cosine x. Negative 1 times 1/4 is negative 1/4 sine x. Beautiful. And then negative 1/9 times 3 is negative 1/3 is what that simplifies down to. And that is all we wrote for this lesson. Know your derivative of sine is cosine. Know that your derivative of cosine is negative sine. And if you even understand y from this graph, you're cooking with gas, which is a good thing.